Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Commonwealth Communities Symposium. Today's event is the third in a series of 5 addressing key areas of interest for local government staff and elected officials in Massachusetts as communities emerge from the pandemic and as we meet today directly after an election yesterday and last night. This symposium is hosted by Smart Growth America and LOCUS in partnership with the Barr Foundation. Before we begin, I'd like to extend a special thank you to Barr for supporting this symposium and a related program of work. Today's event addresses the theme of transit and TOD and the themes that we have seen during the pandemic and in this new period that we are moving into. Other themes throughout the symposium have included walkability and small business support, and in the upcoming sessions we'll be addressing embedding equity into the municipal budgeting process and zoning innovation. Please feel free to share these events with your networks. All of the events are free to register and attend, and we'll be circulating the recordings as well as program materials afterwards. My name is Catherine Burgess, and I'm the Vice President of Land Use and Development at Smart Growth America. Smart Growth America is a national nonprofit dedicated to advancing equitable, sustainable development. We envision a country in which everyone, no matter who you are or where you live, can enjoy living in a neighborhood that is vibrant, healthy, prosperous, and resilient. Land use and development are key to achieving this vision and to addressing many of the most pressing challenges of our time, from racial equity to community health and climate change, especially this week as we watch the discussions in Glasgow. This session is also led by LOCUS, the nation's leading coalition of triple bottom line real estate developers and investors who advocate for federal, state, and local policies to support walkable, equitable development. We're very fortunate to be joined by our LOCUS president today, Jair Lynch, who is a real estate developer based in the Washington, D.C. area, who brings more than 20 years of development experience in the D.C. area and Silicon Valley. Now I'll turn this over to Doug Landry, who's the longtime president of LOCUS Massachusetts. Doug was instrumental in bringing together this symposium and has been, and he'll be our MC today. Thank you so much, Doug, and looking forward to the conversation. I'd also, by the way, encourage everyone to submit questions. Doug will be managing the questions, and we're eager for a lively conversation with all of our excellent panelists. Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Catherine, and welcome again, everybody. This is session 3 of the symposium, 2 more to go. I'm really looking forward to this one. TOD, the future of transit-oriented development. This should be a really great session. And I know this is the day after some elections. I haven't caught up with the Globe yet or other media feeds around the state, but eager to hear what changes have happened. Certainly a big one here in Boston, the first Asian American woman mother ever elected as mayor of Boston. So a real change, in this city. So I'm sure we'll touch on that in some of the sessions here. Again, my name is Doug Landry. I'm the Boston office lead for Langen Engineering, and as Catherine said, I've been involved with LOCUS for a long time. A member of the National Steering Committee and president of the chapter, and fortunate to be working with Jair for all of that time, as he's a member and now he's the president of the organization nationally. It's been just a tremendous experience being part of LOCUS. And we have an awesome panel today. Again, a sort of a curated panel. Heather Hume, who's the director of transition for the MBTA, or Fair Transition. She'll be talking about that initiative. George Leventhal, who's the director of community health, Kaiser Permanente, down in the DC area. And then, of course, Jair. So let's get started. And as you've been part of the other 2 sessions, you know that we ask each of the panelists to, instead of doing the bio thing, just ask them kind of a prompt, about the topic they're going to be speaking with. So let's bring on Heather first. Hello, Heather. How are you?
Good morning.
Beautiful fall day, somewhere where you are.
Right.
So again, Heather's the director of transition for the MBTA. But I want to ask, what is your description of transit-oriented development and a trend that you've seen over the COVID-19 pandemic?
So again, I'm Heather Hume. Doug, thanks for inviting me here. It's a great opportunity to speak. Just real quickly, I'm the Director of Transition for the Fair Transformation Project at the MBTA. I'm also a lecturer at the Kitty and Michael Dukakis School for Public Policy at Northeastern. I teach transportation policy in particular. And thinking about TOD and COVID, actually, I'm gonna speak from sort of the ridership and what we've seen through what has happened over the past 2 years. I'm a former service planner here at the MBTA, and I've had 20 years in the industry of being a bus operator and working my way up through the ranks to where I am today. But one of the great things that I would say that COVID has given us, and I say great, and it's a silver lining, is a clear data set of where we need our routes, where ridership needs us most. COVID has really sort of stripped away all of the sort of daily commuters and really given us an amazing data set to understand where riders need our system the most. And I think that that's really, really important, especially when we're talking with communities, when we're talking with municipalities about why we're making the decisions that we are, because we are seeing constant trends on ridership that isn't just a peak at the peak at 9 a.m., but, you know, ridership that goes until 10, 11 p.m. at night. And, you know, those are trade-offs that we are constantly balancing at the agency. So, you know, from my perspective and thinking about COVID, you know, understanding what the true ridership of like the riders that need it the most, you know, we have a true data set that now we can show and use as a conversation point when we're making decisions.
Great, thanks, Heather. And you'll be up first with your session after the next couple of intros. Next up, George Leventhal. Come on camera, George. How are you this morning? You're coming to us from somewhere in the DC area. How are you? Good to see you again.
Good morning.
Yeah. So George,
Thank you,
give us a little perspective from your point of view. Lessons learned on transit with the COVID-19.
Just to be clear, am I making introductory comments or am I going right into my slides?
Introductory comments. Just you know.
Great.
Yep. Quick
Glad
thoughts
to be here
on trends in TOD over COVID-19. Then we'll get to your session after Heather. Yep.
You bet. So I'm George Leventhal, Director of Community Health at Kaiser Permanente. Kaiser Permanente is a national healthcare system. We actually don't have a presence in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We are in 8 regions around the United States, about 12 million members in our 8 regions. And we're very interested in addressing not only the health of our members, we're a health care provider as well as a health insurer. We are a managed care organization, so it's in our interest to make sure that our members stay healthy and utilize the system as little as possible. And for that reason, and because of our mission and our commitment to equity and social justice, we're very involved in addressing the social determinants of health. And a very significant one of those, of course, is that people are stably housed. And that brought us to the work, which I'll discuss in the Purple Line corridor, to ensure that we continue to make housing near transit affordable and attainable and accessible for people who have waited patiently for decades. You know, obviously here in the Washington region, ridership has diminished substantially. The Washington metro system is struggling, revenue is way down, and we're really, the leadership in this region is trying to figure out how to recover and keep the transit system up and running. We had a significant problem with a metro train derailment brought on by the model of train car, which the metro system procured. Significant delays and closures. So Washington Metro right now is a system in turmoil.
All right, thank you, George. Looking forward to your presentation as well. And then Jair, come on camera if you could. Jair Lynch from Jair Lynch Real Estate Partners in Washington, DC, if he's available. There you are. Hey, how's it going, my friend? How are you? Looking dapper. Again, Jair is president of the LOCUS organization of the Smart Growth America nationally. Been involved for a long time. I'm sure he'll be telling you a little bit about that. But Jair, how are you? You've done the real deal. If you can, I think you're muted. So go off mute. Jair has kind of walk the walk and talk the talk about TOD, particularly in the DC area. So he's going to come to this presentation from some real practical, you know, on the ground experience with TOD. So what have you seen, Jair, in terms of COVID-19? Any trends that you've seen emerge in your perspective? Oh, you still can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right.
Take it away.
Good. Well, Well, one, thanks for all the work that you've been doing in Massachusetts and as part of LOCUS. We think it's very important that we have national leaders like yourself participate in some of the thought-provoking discussions that we have at LOCUS to think about where federal policy intersects with economic development, housing, and transportation. And we try to make equitable, transit-oriented locations and walkable places around the country. So I run a investment and development company in Washington, D.C. We have been in business for over 20 years, and we have been making extraordinary places throughout the region. We work primarily in walkable urban places, which means that we are close to transit, but it also means that we are thinking about entire places as it relates to not only housing, but retail, office, as well as neighborhood assets such as schools, libraries, and primary care facilities. In each one of these situations, we are thinking about how to create places of opportunity. And when we went through COVID, it really illustrated the need for these walkable urban places in which people mix together, in which services mix together, and in which people can interact. We've been doing more of that outside. We've been doing that safely and trying to do that in distances, but the backbone and infrastructure for all of that to happen has been challenged as we think about transit not running at the same scale, streeteries working outside of restaurants, schools working both inside and outside. All of us have been really challenging our thought process. And to me, the lesson learned is that we have to be more resilient, and we've been really all pushed to do more. And that cognitive surplus, I think, is going to be great, and people are going to love it. We also need to be mindful that that's going to erode jobs. So many folks are in the hospitality and the restaurant industry have lost their jobs, and they may not come back because we're able to participate in our food service experience, and that is actually becoming more and more palatable. So we have to think about where are we going to be able to create jobs, which creates economic development, which creates opportunity for all. And we have to not only think about our own conveniences as we come back out of this pandemic.
Good, all excellent points, Jair, and it's connecting, mobility, accessibility, and connecting people with those jobs as it comes back, and it makes, transit even more important coming out of this than ever before. So thank you, and we'll see you later on. Before Heather comes on to do her presentation, I do want to say that the folks who have signed up or attendee list, once again, it's definitely Massachusetts heavy, but there are folks from all over the country actually joining today, Texas, Wisconsin, I think, Michigan, a few others. So, lessons learned here in Massachusetts, you'll be hearing about those, and hopefully you can take these lessons and put them to work wherever you are. And then for Massachusetts, transit isn't just the MBTA, right? It's the PVTA in Pioneer Valley. It's the Metro West Regional Transit Authority. It's Merrimack Valley. It's all over the place. So transit's everywhere. So as you're listening to Heather and the others, yeah, they're going to be focused on the MBTA or the Purple Line down in DC, but the lessons learned, I think, can be transferred to any kind of transit agency we're talking about. So without further ado, Heather Hume, take it away. You're going to be talking about growing Massachusetts Commonwealth-wide transit system.
Doug, you're stealing my thunder here.
Sorry.
It's okay. So I will just go off of what Doug just said. Again, I'm Heather Hume, Director of Transition for the Fair Transformation Project here at the MBTA. And I'm also a lecturer at Northeastern. And so I wear two hats, and I'm working for the agency, but I'm also thinking about policy and trends alike. I will also note, as Doug was saying, I'm going to be giving a presentation about what we're doing as a project at the MBTA. But for folks around the call here, and I almost sit around the room, I can't wait until we're back in person again. But, a lot of what I will be talking about can be applied at a much at different levels. I used to work for the PVTA in Springfield, Massachusetts. I grew up in Holyoke, Massachusetts. I used to be a bus operator in many different areas. And so I understand that, the MBTA is a very large agency, a very complex agency with many different modes. So for many folks around the table, you're going to be thinking, well, my system only has a bus. You will see that as we talk through this, that you can sort of pull threads and technologies and ask questions regarding that. So even though I'm talking about a very large, complex project that may or may not be most related to you, I do think that a lot of the things that we're talking about can be relevant. So a couple other things, and I'd like to go through the deck, but what is the director of transformation? You know, what or the director of transition for fair transformation? What do I actually do? I'm part of a team of about 30 people that is looking at the future of how we interact with customers and how we collect fares. And my role within the team is, I like to say, is the people. My job is to make sure that my internal staff of 6,500 employees at the MBTA are aware and know and are educated on the changes that we're making to our system, our fare collection system, as well as making sure that all of our daily ridership and pre-COVID levels, we had about 500,000 individuals taking 2.1 million trips through our system every single day. My job is to make sure that they are educated, aware, and are ready to adopt the new system as we start to introduce it. So you can imagine the sort of complexities around that position. But we have an amazing team that does a lot of system engineering. We have a whole policy team thinking about the equity issues, our installation teams. We have a very, very comprehensive team, but I'm really focused in on sort of how to communicate the project, how to make sure that people are educated and are ready to embrace and adopt the new technology as we go forward. So as I go through these slides, I'll be able to talk sort of on a high level about what we're actually doing. So what is fair transformation at the T? You know, what are our core values? We're talking about better customer experience, an easier, faster, more convenient way to pay for your trip as you go through the system. We're talking about focusing on core operations. We are moving to what we call a cash off board system, and I'll get into it a little bit more later in the deck. Supporting the future of the MBTA. We're trying to make this system more sustainable. I think one of the things that we're talking about, especially with the theme of this call, is talking about COVID. How are we responsive? How are we meeting the needs of our community? This new system will allow us to be more nimble and more flexible and more responsive to what is happening in trends and you know, in the needs and asks of the community. Equal access. We want to make sure that this system is fair and equitable to everybody who uses the system. Obviously, improve revenue controls and upgrading the system as a whole. Our last fare collection system went in at about 2007, and as you can imagine, that system is getting old and retired, and we're looking to move and upgrade our assets as well. So what is a flexible fare system? And I won't read the slide to folks here, but think about the fact of talking about COVID. And you see a significant drop in ridership. And as I said at the beginning of this presentation, talking about seeing trends in ridership, how can we accommodate folks who are using the system? You know, is that providing discounts to individuals? Is that offering free fares? Is that, you know, discounts or incentives for people to use different systems or modes at different times of day? The system that we're putting together is actually going to be more responsive. It is much more, it's smarter and it's more nimble, and thinking about the ways and the innovation of what is going on with the general ridership in the greater Boston region. So our system is designed to meet those needs and to be more responsive and to be more sustainable. So the other major aspect of what we're talking about, and as I said in a previous slide, we're moving to what we call a cash off board system. And one of the big things that we're talking about and you know, thinking about is moving to what we call all door boarding on our buses and our Green Line trains. Currently today, folks who need to use cash actually have to go to the fare box, which is on board. If anybody is familiar with the sort of system there, that is a very, very labor intensive process where individual has to go on, you know, probe that machine, take the cash off. That is a labor intensive thing that happens every night. Our hope is to actually move cash off board just to help streamline that process, but also to speed up service, to make the experience for the operator and the rider overall more enjoyable, really. The fact that folks can just tap and sit down, They don't have to be working with change or having to deal with any sort of interaction at the fare box. It's just a tap and ride system where and then the operator is not in the business of enforcing fares. We are moving to what we call a proof of payment system, where we would actually have a team of individuals, fare verification teams coming through and verifying fares. And so the whole idea is to make the experience more subway-like, make it faster. We're looking at our projections are actually speeding up service by 10% by moving to this system. And there are a lot of challenges moving to something like this. There's always talk about, oh, the T is moving to a cashless system. The T is disenfranchising individuals who use cash. That couldn't be more further from the truth. We are working tirelessly on a system that ensures that individuals will be able to use cash within a quarter mile of all of our bus stops and Green Line stations. And we are doing that in partnering with retailers around our region, as well as innovations in creating streetscape fare vending machines that are very similar to the parking meters that you would see on many of our streets today. So I'm going to get into just sort of a high-level timeline of what our project is. You can imagine that something as comprehensive as this takes some time. And so I'm going to just talk about really quickly about sort of all the different pieces and components of what we have been doing as part of fare transformation, and what are we looking to in the future. You know, we have our timeline really starts in 2020, and we are looking to the future to 2024. And so I'm going to go through sort of the past initiatives that we've actually put forth, as well as what we're working on today and what we're looking towards. So for folks that are not familiar with the greater Boston region, one of the big things that we have been working with in our communities is to ensure that all of our modes are accessible and are equitable. One of the things that was very prevalent and that we've been working with a number of our neighborhoods in Boston is to make transit equitable in the sense of by mode. We had one particular neighborhood in Boston that had a commuter rail station and had commuter rail lines going through it. And they didn't have rapid transit service. They had bus service, but they were asking the MBTA to make the commuter rail more like a subway. And so we worked with the communities to figure out a way to provide a mechanism so that folks in those neighborhoods could be charged a baseline fare of $2.40, which is what it costs to ride the subway, to then board our commuter rail trains and ride them and get the transfer to the rest of the system in the way that anybody else would using a bus or a rapid transit line. The big driver for all of that is that as we move to our new system, we'll have one card for the entire system. But our current structure today is commuter rail is a completely different fare system with a completely different way of paying with a different card. And so folks that were boarding our commuter rail trains and getting to South Station and getting on a Redline or rapid transit lines were being double charged, where other folks in the system were getting on a rapid transit line, paying for their fare, and then only paying for the transfer that they were making. And so we worked tirelessly with this community to make that system and make the commuter rail more like a heavy rail line, so that folks weren't bearing the burden of being double charged, essentially. So that is one of the big things that was successful when we started rolling that out in May of 2020. A number of other things. Charlie cards are what we call are sort of the basis for everything that we do here at the T and talking about fare payment. Our fare vending machines previously did not dispense Charlie cards, and it was difficult to get them. And so we've worked with numerous community organizations to help distribute Charlie cards so that folks could have access to these cards. And be able to pay and make the system more sustainable. So we've worked with community groups to do that. And then also upgrading our system. We've been working to update our assets to make sure that the machines are available and that our gates are constantly working on a consistent basis. Equal rides for riders without Charlie cards. So going back to what we were talking about with the Charlie cards, In our previous tariff, which is our sort of document that sets our standards for fares and how we collect fares, we had a differential between using a Charlie card and using a Charlie ticket. And that was mainly because we were trying to get more people to use Charlie cards. And as we start to upgrade our system, we're retiring that Charlie ticket. And so we took away that differential so that everybody had a Charlie card, or anybody who was using any fare media would be charged the same rate. And so the folks who were using a Charlie ticket weren't actually paying more to use the system. And then there are a number of pilots that we've introduced around the region, and a number of the pilots have been extended to accommodate COVID. We've seen significant ridership in these particular pilots. One in particular is the city of Lynn, trying to again use commuter rail in a way that is much more rapid transit friendly, and sort of bring that fare down so that folks who need the system and are traveling and commuting every single day into the city have access to a mode that is affordable. So what are we doing this year? I think one of the big things, and one of the things that I'm focused on most right now, is the upgrading of our fare vending machines. Across our system right now, we are going through the process of upgrading our fare vending machines to be able to dispense Charlie cards. We are introducing new fare media type to be more aligned with the technology upgrades that we're making. So our tickets are no longer insertable, they will be tappable tickets. And thirdly, at these machines, folks will be able to use contactless payment and mobile payment. And that has been a continuous trend that we've seen in the folks that are trying to move to sort of touchless systems, so that folks are not interact or actually touching machines, but being able to pay without having to touch a machine or push a button. That has been also a trend that we've seen around COVID, and I'm sure that many folks have gotten their updated credit cards in the mail. I received one yesterday, moving to contactless payment, and that is a big trend that we have seen recently. And then a number of other things we have been working towards, making access to discounted fares as easy as possible. Right now, if you're an individual that is sight impaired or have a disability, or you are over the age of 65, it is not easy, I will say honestly, to obtain that discount that you are entitled to. You do have to visit our in-service center, what we refer to as the Charlie card store, have your picture taken, have that card created. It is a labor-intensive process for anybody. And so what we're doing right now is moving to more of an online system. First, we're moving to online applications so that you can come in and you don't have to wait in a long line. And then also figuring out ways that we can vet and improve the system so that folks don't have to travel all the way into the core to the core of Boston to actually obtain those cards. We're looking at improving the way that we collect fares on the commuter rail. As I said, it's a completely separate system. We hear a lot of feedback regarding, hey, I pay this monthly pass, but a conductor can't get through a super crowded train. We are looking at ways on starting to create more of a tap-on, tap-off environment so that people, are able to pay their fare based on the travel that they take, because our commuter rail is distance-based fares. And so we're starting to turn the corner and actually create a much more tap-on, tap-off environment around that particular mode. And then moving towards the future, I think one of the big things that we talk about when we talk about fare transformation is what is the future? When we talk about 2024, what is that future going to look like? It means that it's going to be an all-door boarding environment. It means that cash will be off board. It also means that the Charlie card will be a card that is universal across all of our modes. That means that you can ride the commuter rail, transfer to a rapid transit line or a bus, and not be charged twice. It means that I can move easily between parts of the system that typically were kind of the fare collection was seen as a barrier. It also means that we're moving to an account-based system, which means that if I lose this card, I can just go to a machine, get a new card, and re-register my card with my account. Therefore, I don't lose my pass. I don't lose any of the stored value that I had on my card. If I am a person with one of the reduced fare cards, it means that I don't have to go back down to the Charlie card store and get a new card. Everything is based on the account. And so that is a much more convenient and easier process for our riders. And then also is talking about contactless payment at the gate. Rather than just paying for your fare at a machine, we're talking about being able to just go up to a gate, or when you tap on at a bus, you can use your contactless payment card, or you can use your mobile app and pay as you go. So these are all ways that we are trying to make the system more accessible and more flexible to our customers. And then, as I alluded to earlier, we're trying to speed up our buses and trains by moving to all-door boarding, to moving that cash off board. You know, for our operators, that means that they can focus on the work that they're doing in terms of operating a vehicle safely, and just letting passengers get on at both the front and back door of the vehicles, and not have to worry about fare enforcement as they do today. And as I alluded to, and I get ahead of myself, it's a seamless mode across all systems. So by 2024, when we bring commuter rail online, you will be able to have one card and be able to easily move throughout the system at any given time. So, you know, as an avid rider, I live in East Boston. I don't own a car. I use the system consistently. You know, this is something that I'm excited about, but I know many other folks are excited about. And I can't stress enough about the fact of the values that we've beholden within this project. It's not just about the technology and going contactless, but it's also ensuring that the folks who need our system most, who use cash, who are underbanked, are still have easy access to our system. We do not, in this project, want to disenfranchise anybody as we move forward. And so it's a slow and deliberate process. We have worked with our communities tirelessly to make sure that we meet the needs of everyone across the greater Boston region. And that is a tremendous amount of effort, but it is it's time well spent. And I think we're going to have better results for it in the future. So with that, thank you. And I will take any questions that folks have.
Awesome. We have a lot. So,
oh boy.
Yeah. Thank you, Heather. It's a really fascinating, and I can't wait for it to be implemented, honestly. The disconnect between the M-Ticket app on my phone, on the commuter rail, and the Charlie card is just, it's hard to figure out. So good luck.
And I really tried my best to take a very technical project, explain it in 10 minutes. So I understand questions, and I will do my best to answer them for you.
So you talked about speed, you know, making it easier to get on board, and, you know, measuring the efficiency of doing that. What other metrics are you going to use? Are you expecting increases in ridership because of this? And where might you expect those increases in ridership to be? What modes, or maybe even at a granular level, like what communities might you see increased ridership? And
so I wouldn't necessarily say that one of the overarching goals is increased ridership. It's meant to make ridership more convenient. And I think that there are many different ways that making ridership, or making the access easier and more intuitive then is a subsequent sort of increase in ridership. I think when you talk about COVID and you talk about bringing ridership back in particular, you know, these are things that these are systems we say that, hey, you know, you can use your card, you can use a contactless payment, you can you now have control of your account online. Those are all incentives that make it easier for folks to access the system. But yeah, I wouldn't say that the overarching goal is to raise ridership, but to make it easier and accessible for everyone as it sits today. And if the ridership returns, and it will return, making it easier and more convenient for them and meeting their needs as they come back.
And you're aware of the housing choice bill that got passed last year with, you know, MBTA communities, adopting by right multifamily around MBTA stations or stops, and there's still some policy kinks that have to get worked out there. But here's a thought, right? Incentivize some of that investment by giving Charlie cards to those projects that actually get built within that half mile.
Right.
Think about that. A theme here is around the cost, and as you know, subsidizing highways is in our DNA everywhere in this country, including Massachusetts. Not so much on transit, right? So who pays? How does that get spread equitably? And I'm going to ask this question in the context of last night, where we have a new mayor in Boston, the first Asian American, first woman, first mother mayor. Very exciting. One of her platforms was making the MBTA more accessible and free, cost free. So this whole conversation around subsidizing transit, subsidizing highway, free MBTA. Just give us your perspective on what we might see from the new mayor and how that's going to integrate with some of the stuff going on at the MBTA.
Sure. So two things that I think of off the top of my head. One, whether the system is free, if you made it completely free or only bus free or only subway free, you still need to have a system on making sure that you know where your ridership's coming from and being able to account for that. So I think the great thing about what we are implementing is that it is flexible, so that if we are currently running a pilot on the Route 28, free fares on the 28, we could easily just make the Route 28 free in our future system, or we decide that we only want to make buses free from a particular hour because we see that there's greater ridership or a need for individuals. We can do that. So in the world of free fares in that context and what we're doing in our project, we are being more flexible and responsive to those kind of ideas and needs. But we also need, the money has to come from somewhere. $700 million, we collect about $700 million in our operating budget comes from fares. And so give or take. And so that money has to come from somewhere. And so we still need folks to tap. We still need to know where folks are coming from. And so that helps us as a marker of knowing, if we're not charging the individual and we're charging the greater community as a whole, we need to be able to have reliable data of understanding where is that actual demand coming from, who is actually writing. So this system that we're moving towards actually helps us to be more responsive to those innovative approaches that Mayor Michelle Wu, or preside, what's the term, but future mayor,
yeah.
Yes, mayor-elect.
2 weeks to go. Yep.
Right. We can be more responsive to innovative ideas that she's bringing forth. And I think I answered everything.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's going to be an exciting time for sure, particularly with the city of Boston. One last question about streetcar suburbs. They were the TODs in the turn of the century, or the turn of the last century, 1800s, 1900s. How best can those historic neighborhoods, business districts, instead of building more and more new, we have existing neighborhoods like that. So where does transit, from your perspective, how does that fit into an economic development strategy in those kinds of communities where there was historically transit, maybe it's declined a little bit, but business districts that need to come back? How does this initiative you're talking about fit in with an overall business development, economic development strategy?
Right. So one of the things that we are doing right now, and I say this lovingly, we have a retail network right now. We have about 150 businesses that work with us on commission through the T that sell Charlie cards. It's not very well advertised. It's not a very well-known thing. We are looking to expand that a great deal as we move forward with our new system, and we're not only are we going to partner with individuals and provide technology, but if businesses already have a Clover, that is simple as downloading an app, and that will absolutely bring more foot traffic into businesses and be able to make the environment in which you pay much more holistic. So if you're going to buy your groceries at the store or going down to the local bodega, you can also, tap up your Charlie card. when you go into the store. So those are things that we are thinking about, particularly with businesses and the growth around that with this project.
Oh, that's very cool. Very cool. All right. Well, wish we could keep going, but you'll have the chance at the end to get more questions. So thank you, Heather, very much. We'll see you later on.
Okay.
Next up, George Leventhal, and George is going to talk about the experiences with trying to implement the Purple Line in the WMATA region down in Washington, D.C. and in Maryland. So George, it's all yours. Take it away.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Heather, for that very interesting presentation, and good luck on your work in having single fare median. That's extremely important for convenience and access. So are we able to see my slides?
Yes,
Are my
George,
slides showing?
If
Great.
you want to
Okay,
go to slide 2, there you go. Perfect. Yep.
Perfect. Okay, great. All right, so I'm going to provide a case study of the Washington, D.C. metro region and where transit-oriented development has occurred and where it has not occurred. The title of my talk is Planning for Transit-Oriented Development Without Displacement, Lessons from Maryland's Purple Line Corridor. But I'm going to begin by talking about the Washington, D.C. area generally. In 1999, Brookings wrote a very influential report called A Region Divided. And the bottom line of that report is that the Washington region is divided by race, income, jobs, and opportunity, with the eastern half of the region, and we're largely talking, when you look at the east, you're looking at northeast and southeast Washington, D.C., and then Prince George's County, Maryland, carrying the area's burden of poverty and social distress, while the western half enjoys most of the region's fruits of prosperity. And this division, this economic division, follows historic patterns of redlining, segregation, and racially restrictive covenants that determined 100 years ago, 75 years ago, and right up to today, who gets to live where and why. So this is a description. This is our, those of you who have traveled to Washington, D.C. recognize the metro map, and I've added the median household income at key locations in the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority WMATA metro system. So you can see on the west side, you have the wealthier suburbs of Washington, D.C., Bethesda, Maryland, with very high median household income, Falls Church, Virginia, and Arlington, Virginia, also with significantly higher median household incomes than what you see on the east side of the DC region, Wheaton, Maryland, Hyattsville, Maryland, Capitol Heights, Maryland, and Suitland, Maryland. So this is just descriptive of the east-west divide that Brookings discussed in 1999. And what we see is that transit-oriented development historically has gravitated to areas that are already wealthier. So the income disparities correlate with disparities in the extent of transit-oriented development at metro stations. So in the suburbs, you have two mini cities of their own. They're suburbs of Washington, D.C., but they're really urban locations with a substantial amount of transit-oriented development, the Ballston Metro in Arlington, Virginia, and the Bethesda Metro in Bethesda, Maryland. Compare these to two other suburban metro stations on the east side of Washington, D.C., in Suitland, Maryland, and in Capitol Heights, Maryland, where you see very little investment. You basically have to drive to the metro station. There's very little adjacent in terms of shopping, amenities, restaurants, jobs, very little there. Now, when we think about displacement, the example in our region that is often raised is Columbia Heights in Northwest Washington, D.C., which was a historically African-American neighborhood, suffered significant damage in the riots in 1968. And then in the 1980s, a very significant influx of Central American immigrants during the Civil War in El Salvador and violence and conflict in other Central American countries. So Columbia Heights was a working class, very diverse, relatively affordable neighborhood. And a metro station on the Green Line opened there in September of 1999. And quoting from the University of Texas Uprooted Project, white, wealthier persons streamed into the neighborhood and market rate housing prices skyrocketed by 146% between 2000 and 2010, pushing out lower income African-American residents and Latino residents. In 2015, Governing magazine called Columbia Heights the nation's fastest gentrifying neighborhood. And these are some statistics, the specifics of gentrification and displacement. During the first decade of this century, the number of African Americans in Columbia Heights dropped by 26%, from 56 to 40% of total population. The number of Hispanics declined by 10%, from 32% to 28% of total population. The number of white residents increased by 351%, from 6% to 27% of total population. Median household income increased 61% compared to 16% for the city of Washington overall. The number of residents with a bachelor's degree increased by 189%, and the number of households with children declined by 28%. So you see the dramatic change in what was a neighborhood with many working class and middle class families became a very desirable place for upwardly mobile professionals with high incomes. Now, there are great benefits to this. You don't want to only describe this as negative. Obviously, the city's property tax base increased. There was substantially increased investment. The quality of life for those who could afford to enjoy it substantially increased. So, you know, we understand that the process of gentrification, the process of transit-oriented development brings with it blessings as well as burdens for those who can't afford to keep up. So we are in the midst of construction of a new light rail system in suburban Maryland. And it has been a tortuous tale of delay due to politics, lawsuits, and problems with the public-private partnership. The Purple Line is not part of the WMATA system. It will be operated by the Maryland Transit Administration, but it will integrate with the WMATA system to provide an east-west connection, which is now lacking. The patterns of development in Washington, D.C., originally, the city was the urban hub where most of the jobs were, and the suburbs were thought of as bedroom communities. So when the metro system was designed in the 1960s and 1970s, the idea was that it would primarily be, it would serve north-south travel from the bedroom communities where people lived to the job centers in the city. That has now changed, and there's a need for suburb to suburb connections because there are more jobs in the suburbs, as I showed earlier in downtown Bethesda, in particular, a major job center, and that will be the western leg of the Purple Line. The Purple Line will connect two legs of Metro's Red Line, as well as the yellow, green, and orange lines. The project was originally under discussion in the 1980s and was officially launched by Governor Glendenning in the 1990s. Then a new governor was elected, Governor Ehrlich, who suspended the project. So from 2002 to 2006, no progress was made, and Governor Ehrlich suggested bus rapid transit in the corridor as an alternative. Governor O'Malley restarted the project and announced a public-private partnership for the Purple Line in 2013. We then had another pendulum shift politically in the state of Maryland. A new governor, Larry Hogan, was elected. He campaigned against it in his 2014 campaign, but he decided to continue it after a year-long study, and he determined that it was a good idea for economic development and for mobility, but that created further delays. So in addition to the political pendulum shifts that I described, there have been multiple lawsuits against the project, in particular in the town of Chevy Chase, an affluent community located right near downtown Bethesda, where residents don't see the utility of transit that takes them to Bethesda because they're already there. So the part of the route of the Purple Line runs on a former railroad line, which was converted to a rail trail project. So a group of advocates called Friends of Capitol Crescent Trail did not want the former railroad right-of-way to be used for passenger transportation. They wanted to keep it as a trail, and they filed a lawsuit in 2014 saying that the environmental review was inadequate. A US District Court judge was sympathetic to that suit and ruled in 2016 that ridership estimates were flawed and environmental approval was revoked. That District Court judge's opinion was ultimately overruled, and construction began in August 2017, but then the public-private partnership fell apart in 2020 over cost overruns. Construction was delayed when the lead private contractor walked away from the deal with the state. A new lead contractor has not yet been named, and the state is now unwilling to estimate the completion of the Purple Line. We don't know when it will actually be in operation. We hope it will be soon. We hope it will be at least in this decade. Meanwhile, new development flourishes at sites where Metro and the Purple Line will co-locate, as you can see the little M symbols on the map, in Bethesda, in Silver Spring, in College Park, and in New Carrollton, where there are already metro stations. We are seeing significant investment in housing. Obviously, office development is struggling in the pandemic times, but still we're seeing substantial investment at those metro stations, which will also be served by the Purple Line. And we're also seeing significant investment at Chevy Chase Lake, which is not on a metro stop, although it's close to Bethesda Metro. It will be a Purple Line stop of its own, and it has already received very significant transit-oriented investment. But investment lags at locations where a Purple Line station will be open in the future, but not co-located with metro. Future Purple Line stops such as Littonsville, Arliss Street, Piney Branch Road, Tacoma Langley, Adelphi, and 2 stations in Riverdale Park have not seen the volume of investment and new development that the locations at Metro have enjoyed. And of course, these communities are located to the east, and they have household incomes significantly lower than the communities where new development is thriving. Now, it's important to remember that a major justification of the Purple Line is precisely to provide social justice and equity, that individuals who live in less developed areas will be able to get access to the jobs and investment in the more developed areas by riding the Purple Line. So the Purple Line Corridor Coalition, with which my company, Kaiser Permanente, has been very active, was formed in 2013. It's a multi-sector collaborative led by the University of Maryland's National Center for Smart Growth in partnership with a wide array of community organizations. Did I just lose the slide? Can you still see the slide?
Yep, I can still see it.
Okay, I've lost track of my own slide. Here we go. A wide array of community organizations, state and local governments, nonprofits, philanthropies, and businesses. The Corridor Coalition led the creation of a community development agreement for the Purple Line Corridor, which articulates a collective vision for vibrant economic and community development in the corridor. The coalition concentrates its work in 4 areas: housing, small business, workforce, and placemaking. And since 2019, Kaiser Permanente has convened and shared leadership of the Purple Line Corridor Coalition Housing Accelerator Action Team, whose goal is no net loss of the estimated 17,000 dwelling units now within 1 mile of the Purple Line that are affordable to families at or below 60% of area median income. We anticipate, when we finally have a Purple Line up and running, high pressure on rents, home prices, and land values. We convene bi-monthly meetings of nonprofit and for-profit housing developers, local government officials, bankers, lenders, and CDFIs to accelerate a pipeline of affordable housing projects. We've retained a housing development consultant to work with property owners, developers, and lenders to bring projects into the pipeline. And my company has contributed $5 million to a revolving loan fund for affordable housing in the Purple Line Corridor. The fund is administered by the National Housing Trust, and it currently totals $10 million and growing. We're getting additional investment from local bankers and lenders. And these are just a few examples of the projects that we've been able to support. These are primarily pre-development expenses. For the most part, these projects will end up qualifying for low-income housing tax credits. This is a multifamily project in Silver Spring, Maryland, with 96 apartments, in Tacoma Park, Maryland. This is a project with 290 apartments. This is a great example of development by a house of worship on its acreage, which is a great target for us because the Purple Line Corridor is heavily built out. It's inside the Beltway, near the District of Columbia, and so among the landowners who have available acreage are churches, synagogues, and mosques, and we're working closely with them. So this project we're very excited about. The Refreshing Spring Church of God in Christ is working closely with us to develop these apartments adjacent to, actually in between 2 Purple Line stations. This is a single family home, which will be available at a deeply affordable price to a low income family. And this is a single family home that's being converted into 2 dwelling units, a duplex, by Habitat for Humanity. and this is a multifamily project in Silver Spring, Maryland, with 102 apartments. So we provided pre-development financing through our Purple Line Corridor Housing Accelerator Action Team revolving loan fund for these projects. We want to work with other landowners and developers, including Jair, our next speaker, to ensure that we are focused on equity and opportunity as the transit-oriented development plays out. So I just want to end with some lessons learned from this case study for equitable community development. First of all, it's necessary to plan for the long term. It took more than a decade after the Columbia Heights Metro opened for gentrification fully to manifest. Transit projects take decades to come to fruition. As you see in the case of the Purple Line, we still don't know when construction will be complete. And affordable housing projects take many years for the financing to come together, for the acquisition of land, for the many different approvals at the planning stage and the local government stage. Investments must have a long time horizon, and it's difficult to provide a precise timetable. And this may be a challenge for philanthropy that demands quick and measurable outcomes. Investment is more likely to manifest once the train is up and running, not before. The uncertainty over the construction schedule for the Purple Line is having a depressing effect on investment in the areas to the east that are not already co-located with Metro. And the mere presence of a transit station does not guarantee transit-oriented development. It's not if you build it, they will come. You can't guarantee that just because there's a Metro station that investment will follow. Investment gravitates to places where investment has already occurred, and this places historically disadvantaged communities at continuing disadvantage. And among the examples of that are the Metro stations like the pictures I showed earlier, where we have not seen investment, which tend to be located in areas with lower incomes and that were historically redlined, such as Branch Avenue, Suitland, Naylor Road, Southern Avenue, Congress Heights, Anacostia, Benning Road, Minnesota Avenue, Deanwood, Cheverly, and Landover. The private market alone will not ensure equitable development. Broad community coalitions, including anchor institutions outside of the housing and lending industries, are desirable. And justice and equity call for attention to be paid. Those who have waited patiently to benefit from the long-awaited infrastructure must not lose the ability to live nearby because of ancillary investment and rising wealth among other people. But at the same time, those communities that have historically been discriminated against must have the opportunity to benefit directly from investment, infrastructure, and wealth formation. So I want to emphasize that the work we're doing on equitable community development is not anti-development. We're not trying to prevent transit-oriented development. We're certainly not trying to prevent the Purple Line. We just want to ensure that the benefits of this major infrastructure investment flow fairly and equitably to everyone in the region, especially those who live nearby and have waited patiently for the convenience and access to jobs, mobility, recreation. We want those folks who have waited for decades for the Purple Line to be able to continue to live nearby and enjoy its benefits. Thanks for the chance to give these remarks.
Wow, George, that was excellent. A lot of, I think Maryland and Massachusetts do share some of the politics around transit and transit expansion. The South Coast Rail project in this state has been going on for decades. Other sort of, micro strategies in expanding transit. When the Purple Line was laid out and the alignment was laid out and station locations picked, what was there an integration of land use policy from the localities, from a permitting perspective, zoning perspective that was aligned with that process? Can you describe that a little bit?
Yes, certainly. So prior to joining Kaiser Permanente Community Health, I served for 16 years on the county council in Montgomery County, Maryland, and I had the opportunity to vote on master plans that substantially called for larger greater density, larger accommodation for housing and jobs at every station along the route in Montgomery County, in Bethesda, in Chevy Chase Lake, in Littonsville, in Silver Spring, and in Tacoma Langley. And the Prince George's County Council is also currently working on the Adelphi master plan. They substantially upzoned College Park. They're looking at a comprehensive zoning map amendment that does allow for greater density at Purple Line stations as well as Metro stations. But as I said, a lot of that is aspirational. It's taken a long time, for example, for investment to flow to Wheaton, where a metro station has been in operation for decades, but it's not on the western side. It's more on the eastern side. And so, but yes, local government has tried very hard in both counties to target investment at transit stations and has revised master plans and zoning to accommodate that growth. And the growth has occurred, as I said, in the more affluent areas and has lagged in the less affluent areas.
And on the funding question, is the federal government a partner in this? What's their role? And you mentioned a P3 model. Describe that a little bit too. I'd like to hear more about how that was formed and what ultimately led to its demise. So federal involvement in the P3 role in this project.
You bet. So yes, there's a major investment from the Federal Transit Administration in the Purple Line. I think the federal investment is $1.3 billion, in near $1 billion. Total cost of the project keeps growing, so I can't even tell you today whether it's a $3 billion project or a $4.5 billion project. And that's very important, obviously, to keep in mind that the initial cost estimates are very rarely correct. As time goes by, inflation, cost overruns, the cost of materials, the cost of labor, they just increase. The longer it takes to build a system, the more it's going to cost. And then your second question about the P3. This was the first P3 in the United States, I believe, for a transit system. And it's been, I can't describe it as a success. I mean, it has not been successful. It was sold by both the O'Malley administration and the Hogan administration as almost no cost to the state, that all the risk would flow to the private partner, that the state agreed to a certain contribution and that would be limited, and that if there were problems or cost overruns, this was what was announced by the politicians, that the taxpayers would be protected and that the private partner would bear any additional costs. And when the additional costs, not surprisingly, occurred, the private partner said, whoa, this was not what we agreed to, and walked away from the table. So I don't think any informed observer would describe the P3 around the Purple Line as successful.
Definitely worth the case study on that in more detail. So just one more question about the coalition and sort of how that got formed, how that got off the ground, and any advice for the folks from Massachusetts on this symposium on how to do that from the grassroots, and is there a coalition of coalitions around transit expansion? In your experience, you've got a national perspective as well. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
Great. Well, it's really wonderful to have been invited today as the guest of Smart Growth America. I certainly would think of Smart Growth America as just what you describe, a national voice for transit-oriented development, density at metro hubs, trying to reorient local planning away from endless suburban single-family zoning sprawl that just chews up land and requires long travel in single-passenger automobiles with the attendant emissions of greenhouse gases and all of the problems created by really the old style of suburban development. Smart Growth America has been a strong voice for changing our view about how communities ought to develop. In the Washington, D.C. region, we have an allied organization called the Coalition for Smarter Growth, which the Purple Line Corridor Coalition works with very closely, which looks at the entire D.C. region to try to promote denser, more compact development with an emphasis on public transportation rather than automobile use. And what was the other question?
No, that's, yeah, even just in how to sort of.
How was the coalition formed, right? So,
how to form,
so one of the major reasons that the coalition was formed was in response to political pressure from a powerful immigrant advocacy group called CASA. And CASA was prepared to file a federal civil rights lawsuit to prevent construction of the Purple Line. They were so worried because of the Columbia Heights example and others about gentrification and displacement of the growing immigrant population inside the Beltway in the Purple Line corridor. And many of us who have been advocates for a long time for more public transportation, better mobility, a change in land use patterns, a change in transportation patterns, were concerned because they were, you had the affluent folks in Bethesda and Chevy Chase who didn't want the lower income folks getting access to their neighborhood. And then you had advocates for lower income folks expressing concern that the transit system might lead to displacement. And so a compromise was reached involving the two county governments and involving the University of Maryland National Center for Smart Growth that created this compact, this community development agreement that laid out these goals that there would be significant public and private investment in ensuring access to affordable housing, ensuring prevention of displacement, and having a mindful and thoughtful approach to, if we are going to upzone, if we're going to increase density, if we're going to redevelop, you need to make sure that the people who live there are at the center of the conversation. And that's been the purpose of the Purple Line Corridor Coalition, which is not a government entity, you understand. It involves local governments, but it's a community leadership group.
Right. Yeah. Please write the case study, please, because I think that's fascinating. It's a work in progress. Thank you very much. So let's bring in Heather and Jair into the mix here for the next 20 minutes or so. So, my role here is to sort of let the three of you kind of ask questions of each other, because I'm sure you've got them. But I do want to hear Jair's perspective on the two presentations so far. Heather's talk about making the system more accessible, the pitfalls and the challenges of getting a transit corridor implemented. Jair, give us your thoughts on the last few presentations, and then if you've got questions among yourselves, let's get the conversation started. So go ahead.
I'll start with just a couple of anecdotes. I had a couple of conversations I've had over my career that have really been indelible marks, and some of them aren't that pretty. I remember having a conversation with a CVS real estate professional that I'll leave unnamed, but a titan in the industry, who basically says, we count our customers and the ability to capture that customer down to the minute. And if we create any friction as it relates to their experience, and in the case of a transit-oriented yet suburban location, that they may lose that customer. And they count it down to if it takes them more than 3 to 5 minutes to be able to park, get out, get their prescription, they may lose that customer to some other kind of drivable suburban location that may have something with a little less friction. And then you think about some of the flip side of that in urban contexts, where you talk about creating 3 and 4 hours of extra experience for residents and visitors to stay in an area that will be able to benefit from retail and the likes. And you think about those friction, those places in which you're basically trying to reduce friction in order for the customer to be able to enjoy, and then you flip that on the other side and you're trying to expand how long they enjoy, because in each case they want to consume. And each one of those situations reminds me of what's happening in both of these presentations, right? Heather's trying to figure out how to eliminate friction. George is talking about transit-oriented development that creates places where opportunity, where jobs and the like are there, and where people will gather and be able to enjoy life. And I think that's really the micro that we have to think about, and the macro that we have to think about, right? It's all a story about where do you want to emphasize your time, your policy, your coalitions. And the reality is you can't do one or the other. You have to do both. And you have to really think about all the little things that go into great places, that can come down to driveways, that can come down to a complete street. And then you have to think about macro issues. You can't just think about the sidewalks. You have to think about macro issues and where are people have opportunities to stay. Are there macro solutions in terms of rent subsidy? Are there macro solutions for homeowners in terms of tax breaks, because they're going to be part of the change? Because if you don't, then you're pulling in two different directions and it won't go. So I think for me, that's what I heard loud and clear from both of these presentations.
Heather or George, any reactions to either of your comments?
Yeah. Well, Jair is a major player in the real estate market in the area that I described, and I would love to ask him his thoughts about what does it take to attract investment to areas that have historically been redlined.
I often liken the concept of real estate development toward like a rocket going into space, right? There is a tremendous amount of energy and fuel and the like to get a rocket off the launch pad and get it up, you know, to 30, 40, 50,000 square feet, 50,000 feet in the air. But then once you get past that and you get into orbit, it's a completely different experience, right? You drop off all the fuel tanks, you start to move around, and you're starting to just play with thrusters and adjust. And real estate development, as you go through the different stages of neighborhoods, is very much the same. The amount of effort, the amount of public capital that's needed in order to accelerate a stage 1 neighborhood to a stage 2 neighborhood. And George, I don't know if you could put up that slide that had all the median incomes around the region.
That was fascinating. Yeah.
You know, we think of neighborhoods through 5 lenses. You know, Chris Lineberger did the same at Brookings through 5 stages. And you can use median income as a proxy for that, right? And you can say Bethesda is a stage 5 place with a median income of 164,000. You can say Suitland is a stage 1 or stage 2 place with a submarket median income of about 60,000. There's a couple neighborhoods in DC that are stage 1 neighborhoods where the submarket median income is all the way down to 30 to 35,000. It takes a tremendous amount of investment to make a stage 2 neighborhood turn into a stage 3 neighborhood. And it takes a completely different type of investment, stabilizers and thrusters and the like, in order to be able to keep a neighborhood a stage 3 or stage 4 neighborhood where people have entry points and it's a place of opportunity for all. But the public investment in those early stage neighborhoods is really important. But that public investment comes in a slightly different form: tax breaks, rent subsidies for both residents as well as retail, in order to create these diverse places of opportunity over time.
So Jair, and Heather too, is transit relevant coming out of COVID? I mean, if there's going to be investment decisions made, what are the signals in the marketplace that people are going to ride transit and, you know, want to live in those kinds of places? How does that affect the investment environment? How does that affect, you know, ridership projections? What's sort of the, you know, perspective from your point of view?
I mean, I'll be super optimistic. Like, of course people are going to return. I think people will think about it differently, and especially I think in the concepts of the way that we work. You know, the new development of working from home, the technology that has been brought forth around that. You know, one of the things I had on one of my slides is talking about the potential of fare capping. So rather than investing in a monthly pass, you know, you ride as many times as you think, and then once you get to a certain level, you don't have to pay anymore. You know, those are things that we are thinking about responding to the sort of trends in evolution of riders. I think that we're looking at a future where it's not going to be the peak of the peak anymore in talking about very service planning terms. You're not going to look at the crush loads at between 7 and 9 a.m. anymore. You're going to see ridership be more consistent over a longer period of time, which, from, again, my service planning hat, is amazing, because that means that I can allocate my resources more effectively than rather than trying to have 100 buses that are only available for 2 hours, and then they're sitting around for half the day until we have the peak of the peak again in the afternoon. So to me, I think a lot of these trends of ability of being able to shift the time that you come into work, or you're only coming in a few days a week, you know, that really allows transit agencies to respond better. But again, like I said, we're thinking about those sort of trends on how do you still invite people to come back? Oh, I don't want to get a monthly pass. I'm not coming in 5 days a week. Well, you know what? We can introduce something along the lines of fare capping in the future state.
I guess I'd like to offer a slightly less optimistic view. I think that we're going to see for the long term, not just, you know, whatever happens with COVID or, you know, public health, more and more people working from home, significant depressed office market, and less transit ridership because people are working from home. They don't need to take transit to get to work. I mean, certainly in some industries they do. I mean, in my company, if you're involved in patient care, we provide patient care at a medical center. So you've got to get to work if you're a nurse or a radiologist or a pharmacist, okay? But if you're somebody like me who's an administrator, they've told me I'm working from home like forever for the foreseeable future. They don't anticipate that I'll be using my office again in the future, and I assume, you know, they're going to be talking about some lease renegotiations. So transit systems, and certainly with WMATA, are going to have to adopt a long-term forecast with diminished revenue and diminished ridership. I just don't think you're going to be seeing as many people, you know, the traditional strap hanger going to work every day. And that does make a significant difference in long-term planning for transit systems.
Yeah, I do think that we're going to see a rise of suburban nodes that start to work as kind of these regional hubs for folks who are working at home that still want to get out, get services, get lunch out, meet colleagues and others. So I do think that we're going to have to really think about what's the urbanization of these suburban places, urban light, suburban heavy. I do think that creates some opportunity within the transit systems. But I do think that if you think that there's 6 and 7% growth kind of in the downtown, I think you're really going to have to modulate some of those expectations, where those might be, you know, much smaller growth. And then the cities that adapt the fastest are going to be the ones that make those downtowns opportunities in which they can introduce affordable housing, they can do conversions, they can think about more mixed use components. Because I think the single-use office park or even the single-use central business district is really not going to be able to support all the infrastructure that's been put in place, not only from a transit perspective, but retail and others. Those restaurants and the like are going to have a really hard time surviving.
One of the things that I think coming out of this for the MBTA, which is a positive, was the commuter rail schedule itself. You know, being smoothed out, right? Making it a more predictable, you know, schedule, you know, going out to the suburbs, you know, the subway system is more inner core, but the commuter rail system is pretty extensive, and making the schedule way more convenient and more predictable, I think is going to go a long way. Please, Heather, tell us if that's going to stay. You know, I'm doing.
I really do. I really do.
You know, working on a project on the South Shore on the Plymouth line, and you know, that goes right through Brockton. It goes into Braintree, Quincy, and you know, I do think that if you have a stable schedule, more predictable schedule, you know, I think from an investment standpoint, that's a good thing, right? You know, you're going to have residents, workers, whoever, you know, reliant on something they can depend on. So I do hope that sticks around. The Purple Line is a light rail system, correct?
That's correct.
So can you talk about sort of the modal challenges, right? Because I don't think there's any other light rail as part of the WMATA system, if I'm correct. So it's something here that, again, the MBTA, where we have subway, we have bus, we have commuter rail. We've talked about DMU, we've talked about sort of, you know, other kinds of transit modes. How has that conversation gone with the operators, and just getting people familiar with that type of mode, how to operate, how to maintain it? What are some of those challenges that you've seen?
Well, there's been an enormous amount of conversation in the planning to make sure that the Purple Line is integrated and that the transfer from the heavy rail to the light rail is as seamless and convenient as possible. But it is a different system, and you are going to have to leave the metro system and walk, you know, ideally a very short distance to the other system. It's a different rail, it's a different track. Like the Charlie card, there has been a commitment to having a single fare medium that will work on both systems. So, you know, you have to hope for the best. I mean, if you look at the way the Silver Spring transportation hub has been designed, the way the Bethesda transit hub has been designed, Metro is adjacent to the Purple Line, but you do have to leave one system and get on another, and that may be a hindrance to some folks, you know, especially if they haven't used the system before. It's going to take some getting used to, but it's very much a central topic of discussion among both the Maryland Transit Administration, which will run the Purple Line, and the WMATA multi-jurisdictional arrangement agency that runs the metro system.
Heather, any Any thoughts on that? Sort of, I know that the MBTA has its hands full with the modes you have, but introducing,
Yeah, other than Philadelphia, we have the highest number of different modes across the system. And when you talk about
what don't we have that Philadelphia has?
so we have the same number. My husband loves to remind me of this. He's born and bred in West Philly. So, some of it's great. Like when we move to one fare system, it'll be commuter. We manage commuter rail, we manage ferry, we manage heavy light rail, bus, trackless trolleys, PCC cars. Like we have the history. You want to learn about transit history? It's here. But you also pay for that history here. And there are a lot of things that, because we're the first transit system, or the first light rail system in the country, that has a lot of challenges to go with it. You can imagine the maintenance costs, the talent that we have to hire, the expertise that we need to have. You talk about the commuter rail line, and now we can smooth it out because the ridership's smoothed out. But when you have 4 different lines all trying to get in at South Station at 5 p.m., obviously you have to spread the schedule was so wonky before because you've got to spread it out because there's only a number of tracks to get into one station, and there's no other way. You can't build out, you can't build up, you can't build down. So especially with a system like Boston, fare collection is one of those unique places where we can really unify the system as a whole. It's one of the many challenges I have in terms of change management. When I say 6,500 employees, I'm talking about at least working with 60 different departments, 3,000 operations staff that I have to train on all of the different changes that we're making as we move along in fare transformation. And I feel like I'm uniquely up to the challenge in the fact that I have a very broad history of across different modes in public transit. But I think it's a benefit, and we see it as a plus in a lot of ways. But also I look at smaller transit agencies that are just bus, and I'm like, man, when I was a PVTA, the things I could do so much easier, so much simpler. You could be really innovative and push something forward. I do kind of miss those days. So there are pros and cons to all of it in any way. So whether you are a small transit system with a town with, 10 buses or 15 buses versus the MBTA with our 175 cities and towns, there are innovations and ways that you can move forward and be more responsive, and again add to the attraction of using transit and developing TOD.
Cannot believe we're done already 90 minutes here, because this could go on. People who want to contact Heather for her favorite bus driver story, please do that. Because I used to ride the PVTA when I was out in the Happy Valley there, so I have stories of my own as a rider. But Jair knows this too, is that at the federal level, in LOCUS was very instrumental, and you've heard me say this before, of establishing a couple of programs around transit-oriented development, investment, and financing, and that's with the RIF and TIFIA programs. And we have a friend in the administration now who used to be the executive director of LOCUS, who was instrumental in writing those programs. I've had the experience recently of working with the US DOT and the Build America Bureau, trying to get financing for transit-oriented development projects. It's very hopeful. I would just say that, these programs have been in place. Again, the hard work of Jair and the whole SGA staff getting it, as law. And now the devil's in the details in how this program is implemented from a policy level. I will tell you that the US DOT is a good partner, George. And, I think having conversations with them constantly of how to move the project forward in the purple line, I think you'd have some very willing open ears, which you haven't had in the past 4 or 5. So there are programs out there for private investment. And I just hope that, those programs can get unlocked and be used the way they're supposed to be used. Any closing thoughts, Jair, George?
I would say just continue to think about the micro and the macro as ways to make communities move forward and allow them to be inclusive and equitable over the long term. Just because you invest in transit and the hard infrastructure doesn't mean that the soft infrastructure doesn't have to be taken care of in the later half of the cycle as we move through, from different stages. And then I think we also need to continue to be bold in terms of figuring out ways in which we can share this very expensive infrastructure with other industries or other partners, and be able to support it, whether it's monetizing advertising, whether it's sharing one of the cars. It's got to be something, because the bulk of what's there is very, very helpful for economies to grow, and we shouldn't be shying away from its cost.
Yeah, I agree. You have to look at the macro and the micro. I think the big macro influences right now, and transit is a huge part of the conversation around both, are of course the pandemic and of course climate change. We know that public transportation is absolutely necessary to diminish the emission of greenhouse gases. We've got to get more people on rolling stock and out of their automobiles. At the same time, the pandemic is going to lead to dramatically reduced revenue forecasts for transit. There's going to be fewer transit riders commuting to work, more people working from home. So it's a big challenge. The need for transit is greater than ever to diminish automobile use, but the revenue likelihood for transit is less than ever because of more people working from home. So that's a big dilemma that transit planners and community development planners have got to factor into their thinking.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you. Tremendous insights, tremendous experience here. Really appreciate you participating in this. There in the chat box, I believe there is a survey, a link to the survey for the symposium. So attendees, please fill that out. We want to hear from you on any of the feedback on the topics or how this has been going. There will be a recording made available for all of the sessions. So in case you had to jump off or missed it, we'll make these all available beginning tomorrow, I believe. And then the next session coming up is November 17th at 10 a.m. And this is going to be about incorporating equity into your municipal budget process. That's going to be, again, another fascinating, great panel. And as we continue to build through, these topics, thanks again to the Barr Foundation, because we're giving technical assistance to the municipalities in Massachusetts that are participating. And I think we're giving you a broad perspective on how we, emerge from this whole experience of the last 2 years. So thanks again, George, Jair, Heather, and we will see you all again on the 17th. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.